Amina had always lived in a world where the sun rose over the wide fields before she opened her eyes. Every morning she would hear the sound of animals waking up, birds singing softly in the trees and the quiet wind moving through the grass. But the sound that always came after was not peaceful. It was the sound of people giving her orders. That was how her life had always been. She was still a child, but her hands were already rough from work. She cleaned floors, washed clothes, cooked food, and carried heavy buckets of water from the river. She didn't have time to play or talk like other children. She didn't even remember the last time someone asked her how she felt. The people she worked for didn't see her as a child. They only saw her as someone who had to work from sunrise to sunset. For a long time, Amina accepted this as normal. She had no family near her, no friends, and nowhere else to go. She had been taken far away from her home when she was very young. All she could clearly remember was the soft voice of her mother singing to her when she was little. That memory was the only thing she held on to. One day, something began to change. It started quietly, like a whisper in the background. Amina began to feel tired in a way she had never felt before. Her arms ached and her skin started to hurt. At first, she thought it was because of all the work. She didn't say anything to anyone. She just tried to keep working, hoping it would pass. But it didn't pass. Over the next few days, small patches began to appear on her arms. They were red and warm, and they made it hard for her to lift the buckets. She tried to cover them with her sleeves so no one would see. She was scared that if anyone noticed, they would get angry with her. The illness grew worse. What began as a small patch slowly spread. She felt a burning feeling on her back and arms, and she couldn't sleep well at night. When she woke up, she was weaker than before. The people around her started to notice her moving slower. She heard them whispering. They didn't ask if she was okay. They didn't give her medicine or help her rest. Instead, they looked at her with fear in their eyes. Amina didn't understand why they looked at her that way. She only knew she was hurting. Each day became heavier. Her steps grew slower and the world seemed quieter, as if it had turned away from her. The air around her felt cold even when the sun was shining. She stopped hearing birds in the morning because her mind was full of the ache in her body. One night, after a long day of work, she was sitting on a small wooden step outside the house. She looked at the stars in the sky. They were bright like little fires in the dark. She remembered her mother again. Her mother once told her that stars never leave, even if clouds hide them. Amina whispered to herself that maybe one day she would find a place where she could rest under those stars without fear. But before she could finish the thought, she heard footsteps. The people she worked for were talking in low voices. She didn't understand everything they said, but she heard one word again and again. Sickness. Their voices were not soft. They were full of worry and something else. Distance. The next morning, everything felt different. Nobody spoke to her. They avoided looking at her. When she walked by, people moved away quickly as if she were carrying something dangerous. She felt like the world was shrinking around her. Later that evening, when the sky turned orange and the sun was almost gone, she was told to follow one of the older men to the edge of the land. She thought maybe they were taking her to a doctor. She followed quietly, even though she was shaking inside. They walked far away from the house, past the field she used to work in. The grass grew taller and there were no more fences or lights. Amina looked up. The stars were beginning to appear again, one by one. When they reached a quiet, empty place, the man stopped. He didn't look at her. He simply turned around and walked back without a word. She didn't understand at first. She called out softly, but no one answered. Then she realized she was alone. For a moment, she stood still, trying to make sense of what had happened. She looked around. There was no house, no road, no other person. The world around her was silent. She waited for someone to come back, but no one came. The night grew colder. She sat down on the ground, wrapping her thin arms around herself. Her skin hurt and the air made it worse. She didn't cry loudly. She didn't even have the strength. She just stared at the stars again, whispering her mother's words in her mind. The next morning, she woke up to the sound of wind. She was still in the same place. Her throat was dry and her body ached all over. She tried to stand up, but her legs were weak. She didn't know which way to walk, but she began to move anyway. She walked slowly, step by step, through the open land. Sometimes she stumbled, but she didn't stop. She thought maybe, if she just kept walking, she would find someone kind. She didn't want to believe the world had completely turned away from her. but as the day passed, she saw people working in distant fields. When they noticed her, they froze. Their eyes went to the marks on her skin, and they quickly turned away. Some whispered. Some ran inside their homes. No one came closer. Amina lowered her head and kept walking. She didn't understand why everyone was afraid of her. She was just tired, sick, and alone. By the second evening, the sky turned a soft gold again, and the air smelled like dry grass. Her feet were blistered from walking barefoot. She leaned against a tree and closed her eyes, her breathing slow and heavy. She wasn't sure she could walk much longer. In the distance, a soft sound reached her ears, the sound of animals moving. She lifted her head and saw a ranch far away. There were cows in the open field and fences around the land. She wasn't sure if she should go closer, but she also knew she had no other choice. As she dragged her tired feet toward the ranch, the last bit of sunlight disappeared. A tall man named Samuel was checking the fence and counting the animals. He was a quiet, hard-working rancher who lived alone with his animals and his land. He wasn't expecting to see anyone at this hour. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a small shadow moving slowly near the fence line. At first he thought it was an injured animal. His hand went to his hat as he walked closer, squinting through the soft evening light. When he got closer, he saw her, thin, tired, and shaking. Her clothes were torn and dusty from the long walk. Her head was lowered, and she looked like she could fall at any moment. Samuel froze for a second. He had seen many things on his land, lost animals, stray dogs, but never a child like this. She tried to take one more step, but her knees gave way, and she fell to the ground near the fence. Samuel rushed forward and knelt beside her. He spoke gently, asking if she could hear him. She lifted her eyes slowly, and for a moment their eyes met. In that moment, Samuel saw something he would never forget. He saw the quiet pain of someone who had been left behind, not because they did something wrong, but because no one cared enough to stay. Her skin showed the signs of the illness that had made others afraid. But what Samuel saw wasn't something to fear. It was a child who needed help. The evening wind moved softly through the grass, and the world seemed to pause. Amina lay on the ground, exhausted and silent. Samuel realized he couldn't walk away. He took a deep breath, knowing that his life was about to change. And in that quiet moment, under the soft glow of the fading sun, a story of fear and abandonment slowly turned into one of hope and courage. Samuel looked down at the girl lying on the ground. She was breathing softly, her small chest rising and falling with great effort. Her face was pale, and her arms were covered with old marks and fresh sores. But more than her wounds, it was the silence in her eyes that held him still. It was the kind of silence that came from being alone for too long. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she came from. But he knew one thing: he couldn't leave her there. He carefully slid his arms under her body. She was so light that it felt like carrying a bundle of dry leaves. She didn't resist. She didn't even speak. Her head rested against his chest, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the warmth of someone's care. Samuel carried her into his old wooden house near the fields. The house wasn't big, but it was strong, built with his own hands over many years. He laid her gently on a soft chair near the fire and quickly covered her with a clean blanket. She shivered a little, but her breathing became more steady. Samuel rushed to the kitchen, filled a bowl with warm water, and brought a clean cloth. He sat beside her and carefully wiped the dust from her face and hands. The marks on her arms made him pause for a moment. He had never seen anything quite like them, but instead of fear, he felt a deep ache in his chest. Whoever this girl was, she had suffered in silence for too long. The girl opened her eyes slowly. She saw the firelight dancing on the walls, and the warm glow made the room feel safe. Samuel gave her a soft smile. "You're safe here," he said in a quiet voice. She didn't answer, but her eyes followed his every move. He brought her a small cup of warm soup. At first, she didn't reach for it. She had never been treated kindly before, and it felt strange to her. But Samuel didn't rush her. He just placed the cup near her hands and waited. After a moment, she lifted it with shaking fingers and took a small sip. It was the first warm meal she'd had in days. That night, Samuel sat near the fire long after she fell asleep. He didn't know what to do next, but he knew he had to help her. There was a small clinic in town, a simple place with kind doctors who helped people from nearby farms. He decided to take her there in the morning. The next day, when the sun came through the window, Samuel wrapped her in a warm shawl and carried her to his old truck. The road was bumpy, but she didn't complain. She just held the edge of the shawl tightly, looking out at the fields passing by. When they reached the clinic, the nurses rushed to help. The doctor, a gentle woman with kind eyes, examined the girl carefully. Samuel stood nearby, his hat in his hands, feeling nervous. After a long moment, the doctor spoke softly. "She's very weak," the doctor said. "She has an infection on her skin, but it's treatable. With good care, clean bandages, and medicine, she'll recover." Samuel let out a deep breath he didn't know he was holding. It wasn't something that would keep people away forever. It was something that could be healed with time and care. The girl stayed in the clinic for several weeks. Every day, Samuel visited her after finishing his work at the ranch. Sometimes he brought her fresh fruit, sometimes a small book with pictures, and sometimes he just sat by her bed, letting her know she wasn't alone. At first, she barely spoke. Her voice was soft, like the sound of wind moving through dry leaves. But slowly, as the days passed, she began to say a few words. She told the nurse her name, Amina. It was a small step, but it was a beginning. The nurses cleaned her wounds and gave her medicine. Her skin slowly started to heal and her strength returned bit by bit. The first time she managed to sit up and eat on her own, Samuel smiled proudly from the corner of the room. She noticed that smile. No one had ever looked at her with kindness before. As the days turned into weeks, she began to talk more. She didn't tell her full story, but she shared small pieces. How she had worked for people who never spoke kindly to her. How she had been left alone when she got sick. And how she had walked for days without anyone stopping to help. Samuel listened quietly, never interrupting. He didn't need every detail to understand how much pain she had carried. The town slowly began to hear about the girl. At first, some people were unsure. They remembered seeing her walking through fields and had been afraid to help. But when they learned the truth, that she had only been sick and that it wasn't something to fear, they felt sorry. A few people began to visit the clinic, bringing small gifts or warm clothes for her. One sunny afternoon, after nearly a month, Amina took her first steps outside the clinic. Samuel was waiting for her by the truck. She walked slowly, carefully, like someone learning how to trust the ground again. Samuel held out his hand to help her climb into the truck. For the first time, she didn't hesitate. She reached out and took it. When they returned to the ranch, the land looked different to her. It wasn't just a field anymore. It was a place where she had been found, a place where someone had chosen to care. Samuel gave her a small room at the back of his house. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and clean. He placed a soft blanket on the bed and a lamp by the window. Amina touched the blanket carefully, as if making sure it was real. She had never had a space that belonged to her before. In the mornings, she would sit by the window and watch the animals move in the field. Samuel taught her how to feed the chickens and gather eggs. He didn't give her orders like others had done. He spoke gently, and if she was tired, he told her to rest. One evening, as the sun was setting, she stood outside the house watching the sky turn orange and pink. Samuel walked over and stood beside her. "You're getting stronger," he said. She nodded slowly. "I feel safe," she whispered. It was the first time she had said those words out loud. Samuel looked at her with quiet pride. He didn't need to say anything more. Meanwhile, the local authorities learned about Amina's story. The clinic had shared her case with the town office, and soon people began to ask questions about where she had come from. An investigation started, not to bring trouble to her, but to make sure other children like her wouldn't have to go through the same thing. A kind woman from a nearby children's home came to visit. She talked gently with Amina, explaining that they could help her go to school, learn new things, and live with children who had also found new homes. Amina listened carefully. She liked living on the ranch, but deep inside she knew she wanted to learn, to build a future that didn't begin and end with pain. Samuel saw the light in her eyes when she talked about school. He felt both happy and a little sad. He had grown used to seeing her smile every day. But he also knew she deserved a life filled with more than fields and fences. On a bright morning, Samuel drove her to the children's home. She held his hand tightly, just like she had done when she left the clinic for the first time. At the gate, she looked up at the building. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was full of life. She could hear children laughing inside. Samuel knelt down so they were at the same height. "You're going to do great things," he said. "You're strong, Amina. stronger than most people ever know. Her eyes filled with quiet emotion. She didn't have the words to say everything she felt, so she simply hugged him. It was a soft, warm hug, the kind that carried both gratitude and love. From that day on, Amina's life began a new chapter. She went to school for the first time. She learned how to read, how to write, and how to dream. She made friends who didn't look at her with fear, but with kindness. Samuel visited often. Sometimes he brought her homemade bread or a small flower from the ranch. Each time she saw him, she ran to greet him with a smile that reached her eyes. Years passed, and the scars on her skin faded, though they never fully disappeared. But they no longer told a story of pain. They told a story of survival, of a little girl who was once left behind but found by someone who cared. The ranch remained a special place for her. It was where her story changed. It was where someone saw her not as a burden but as a life worth saving. Amina grew into a strong and hopeful young woman. She dreamed of helping other children who had been through hard times. She wanted to show them that being abandoned was not the end of their story. It was just the beginning of a new one. And Samuel, the quiet rancher who once thought his life would always be the same, learned that sometimes the greatest changes come not with noise but with a small moment of kindness.